Hello, my name is Ian Watson, and I am a Director Emeritus of the American Membrane Technology Association. The interview you're about to see is the 32nd in a series of what we call Chats with the Pioneers. AMTA is a technical association founded on the advocacy of the use of membrane technology for water treatment, from wastewater reclamation and reuse to seawater desalination. The heart of this technology is the membrane itself. About 3.5 years ago, our board of directors decided that to preserve the history of membrane and membrane system development, the association should make an effort to record these chats with the pioneers and those responsible for launching what is now technology in common use throughout the world. AMTA's intent is to make segments of these chats available on our website so that a new generation of engineers and scientists can understand the efforts of those pioneers that helped solve some of the water issues facing the world today. With me today I have three gentlemen who have been around the industry for a while. On my immediate left is Ed Lohman, in the middle Ken Trompeter, and on my far left Kurt Frank. And I'd like each of you, if you would, to give me a brief précis of your experience, education, and so on. Kurt, we'll start with you.
I worked for a professor of chemical engineering part-time while I was a student, and that was the owner of W.L. Badger Associates also. He had a consulting business on the side, and he had a contract with OSW to test vertical tube evaporators for distilling seawater. So I got into this business from the distillation side before even membranes were really commercially developed. And later on, I went to work, after I got my degrees, I went to work for the Bureau of Reclamation in Denver for about 3 years, then for Stearns Roger in Denver, and they had another contract with OSW, further developing distillation at the Wrightsville Beach Test Station. And then I went to work for Envirogenics Division of Aerojet General. And at that time, I got into the membrane side of the business a little bit more. And after Stearns, after Envirogenics, I went to work for Boyle Engineering in Newport Beach, and worked mostly in conventional water and wastewater treatment plant design, but also they had some small study contracts like Cambria in California, and I understand Cambria is now again deciding to do something about desalting.
I think this is the third time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they went on, and now they couldn't decide what to do about it. And also with the Santa Barbara desalting plant a little bit. And then next was with the Bureau of Reclamation again, going to Saudi Arabia for the advisory team with SWIC, and working there with Bill Mahoney. Then later in Yuma on the YDP with Ken Trompeter. And after that with Film Tech, and that was all membrane work, obviously, then. And I went to Las Palmas and started up that big desalter in Las Palmas with Film Tech membranes. And its plant was expanded probably a couple times by now, and it supplies something like 80% of the water for Las Palmas now. And after coming back from Las Palmas, I went to work for Corlo Engineers in 1991, and I stayed with them for 15 years until 2006, when I finally decided to retire at 75 years old. And with Corlo, I got into quite a few desalting plants. You know.
Good, good. Ken, how about you?
I came to the Office of Saline Water in 1970, came from the Navy Department, where we were working in utilities, power generation. which started out to be a better fit. I have a degree in mechanical engineering from the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. But we had an opportunity to make that move over to OSW, and I went up to manage the test site in Webster, South Dakota. That was the electrodialysis demonstration plant.
Right. Not ionics.
It was not. It was Asahi,
That's right.
much to Bill Katz's irritation. But we ran that for a year and a half. And up there we also had some smaller RO units. Both we ran some hollow fiber stuff, as well as some of the spiral wrap stuff. In 1971, they moved me down to Roswell. Roswell had the vapor compression distillation plant and the brackish water test center, which was built to be able to simulate the 10 most frequently occurring waters in the western United States. So we were blending waters and did a lot of mostly RO stuff. We had a little bit of electrodialysis stuff because we were doing some brine concentration. But it was mostly reverse osmosis stuff. We did run the distillation plant 1 year out of all that. At that time also was when somebody finally decided to get serious about Yuma. So we built a half a dozen or so test trailers, which we hauled over there and connected up with Dr. Channa Basapa's traveling circus, which I don't know, some people might remember that. But Dr. Channa had, he had 6 or 8 trailers, and he hauled them all over the West, just all over everywhere for a little while. And then and when we got a little more serious, then the OSW asked me to move up to Denver to coordinate with the Bureau of Reclamation, who had decided to become the lead agency for the Yuma desalting plant, and eventually took over the whole shooting match. I stayed with the Bureau of Reclamation from 1974 to actually 1988. Moved to Yuma in 1983 to take over as the project manager of the Yuma Projects Office, which included construction of the desalting plant. When we came to a parting of the ways in 1988, I came back up to Las Vegas, and I went to work for the Clark County Sanitation District as the construction manager for an advanced wastewater treatment plant that they built. We finished that, and then I went to work for Gannett Fleming and rebuilt the water treatment plant in Norfolk, Virginia.
I remember that. Remember when you were there?
Yeah. We ran into each other on the airplane, I think,
Yes, we did.
one time. When we finished that, I came back here and I went to work for Greeley and Hansen. I built 2 advanced wastewater treatment plants here in Las Vegas, where that treated effluent all went to irrigation within the city and the county, parks and golf courses and what have you. After we finished those, then Ed and I went to work for a little while for a construction contractor writing the startup manuals for the new water treatment plant that Clark County built out west. And once we got done with that, I kind of got done. I stayed a little bit active with AWWA with both the desalting committee and the reuse committee for another couple of years, but I kind of let that dribble away, and I've not been involved really since. So for 6 or 7 years now, been just doing other things.
Good. Ed?
Well, I guess it's my turn.
And you're both Dakotans, but one's from the north and one's from the south.
That's correct. I got my start in desalting with the Navy Department in Washington. When I first joined them as a young engineer trainee, they had done a study of putting in a thermal desalting plant in Guantanamo. And they didn't have much for me to do, so they piled the books on me and says, read this. About the time I finished that little sojourn in a month or so, Castro shut off the water to Guantanamo Bay, and lo and behold, I was a desalting expert. Went down there. In the first portion of that, we took the Point Loma multi-stage flash unit Westinghouse had built that was here in California, and then moved it down there. The portion with the steel tubes we just left there as junk, and that plant ran for over 20 years down in Guantanamo, but additional units from Aquachem and IDE were installed later, and now it's all RO down there. So the thermal was where I really got started in it. After that, I went to OSW about the same time Ken did, about 70, I guess, and was
Way back in 1970, way back.
way back in 70.
Way back.
Was looking after a couple of the research facilities they had in Freeport, Wrightsville Beach, and San Diego. And then a year or so later, I managed a research facility there at Wrightsville Beach, where we had a lot of pad-mounted equipment and utilities, so the various manufacturers could perform their experiments on desalting. We had a freezing plant down there, which didn't work out too well, and a couple submerged tubes, vertical tubes, and multi-stage flash. I was there for maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and went back to Washington before OSW got the axe. And when that happened, I left and went down to Guantanamo and managed that plant for probably a total of 10, 12 years, something like that. After that, after I was there about 5 years, went over to Saudi Arabia, worked with SWIC and their research facility, and designed a facility very similar to Wrightsville Beach, or wrote the specs for it for them to build there at in Saudi. From there, I went back down to Guantanamo, did the same job, and then Ken let me come to Yuma and manage that plant for Burns and Rowe for about 5 or 7 years, and then went over to the reclamation side of the house so I could give the contractor heck. And other than that, that's about it.
Well, by that time, having worked for Burns and Rowe, at that time, you knew all the tricks.
Yes.
So you were valuable to the Bureau.
Well, at least I knew they couldn't pull anything over on me.
Oh, thank you. You have a strong background in the early days in thermal, Kurt. What were your impressions when you started looking at membranes? Did you ever think that they would occupy such a big place on the seawater side of things?
Well, it's a good question. You know, the old distillation guys, they didn't think much about, you know, membrane technology.
got it.
You know?
Yeah.
But as the technology developed, you know, they came around to looking at it. You know, maybe we better look at that, you know, and think about what we do with it. Of course, you know, I don't know if you interviewed anybody that was involved with the development of membranes. You know, a lot of those guys are no longer around. Sidney Loeb, you know, and the fellow that developed the spiral wound membrane, you know, Don Bray and Julius Westmoreland, especially when the spiral wound membrane was developed, you know, that turned things around quite a bit. You know. They, of course, initially they did tubular membranes and also the DuPont hollow fine fiber membrane. You know, and there was big competition for a long time between DuPont and the people that developed the spiral wound membranes. And as it ended up, you know, DuPont gave up finally on the hollow fine fiber. And so spiral wound membranes is it, more or less, especially for seawater dissolving. Now, when you talk about wastewaters and wastewaters, you know, tubular is still, you know, and for pre-treatment for the actual dissolving they still use tubular.
Dow and DuPont both gave up on hollow fiber about the same time.
Yeah.
Dow, when they bought Filmtech, obviously they saw a better mousetrap there. And
Yeah.
DuPont
Yeah, I think
wasn't
they did,
long
yeah.
behind them.
Yeah.
Well, Dow was having a little trouble even down in Roswell. They had Dow and DuPont and Monsanto had contracts to build 12 or 16-inch diameter hollow fiber bundles, and I think maybe that's part of what made them give up. They were just too big, and the hydraulics were just so bad that they.
Did
And
you have the
as Kurt says, the spiral wound stuff was starting to look so good.
Yeah.
And it was much more flexible. Could handle a lot of different waters better. So yeah, I think they read the handwriting on the wall. Those guys did.
Did you have the Dow quad membrane at Roswell, or had they not developed that yet?
No, we didn't have no.
Because I saw a couple of examples of that in Florida, where a couple of plants they had it on test. And it was shortly after that they bought Filmtech, so I wondered if that was like, and it was a big device. I wondered if that was like the last hurrah.
Might have been.
Yeah. So you also did a lot of thermal work, Ed. Because I was 69, I started doing some work there on a study that I was doing with Ed Miller on ion exchange. And so I got to know some of those guys, and they said, membranes will never work. I said, yeah, but Key West's falling apart. So you got to do better. When you moved the Point Loma plant, was that a duplicate of Key West?
No,
It was an improved version of Key West.
probably.
Yeah.
But it, you know,
But the tubes were, what were the tubes made of?
well, copper nickel were part of the unit. They had different tubing in it. They had aluminum, bronze, copper, nickel, and just plain steel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the problems with the thermal was material development over the years. You know, it kept getting better. And of course, when stainless became available and reasonable cost, why, that solved a lot of the problems on the thermal side.
Now, were you at SWIC at the same time as Kurt? Or
No, I
consulting with
was.
SWIC?
I guess I was there before you were, huh?
Yeah, you were the first one actually with SWIC, you know, and
Yeah.
then Bill Mahoney was next.
Right.
And then I took over from Bill Mahoney for a couple of years.
Yeah.
They had a membrane plant there in Jeddah.
And Bob Mater, was Bob Mater there with you? From
Yeah, he
DuPont?
was there at the same time I was there, but he was not with OSW. He was,
No, he was-
actually a contractor with Swick directly.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now, were they looking at membranes at that time, or were they still firmly committed to thermal?
They were looking at membrane, but not all that much, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
was
they're
just
still
starting.
building MSF plants now over there, you know.
Yeah.
So they, but they're getting into membranes now a lot
Yeah.
more, you know. But at that time, there were
Right.
really no commercial, you know, production
No
plants for
production
membrane.
plants.
No,
It was
Right.
more
Just-
research work.
just yeah.
And this is a question I don't ask very often, but given the backgrounds that you three have, what is the most depressing moment in your career involving membranes?
When they appointed Jim Watt as Assistant Secretary of the Interior.
Okay.
I figured you'd ask that question, you know. I don't really have isolated, you know, remembrance or reminiscence about divorce type, you know. I mean, I figured once I saw how the spiral membrane worked, you know, that was it, you know. I was very optimistic, you know, for membrane technology after
Yeah.
that.
I think in Yuma, when we were starting to run the research facility unit with the cellulose acetate membranes, when they started failing right away, and we're trying to figure out what was causing them to fail, and finally determined that it was just plain iron and chlorine as it was changing phases into the ferric side.
Right.
When it turned ferrous, it really ate up the membranes. So we had a change in the design of the plant where we added ammonia to kill the chlorine, and then the membranes lasted very well after that. But that was very frustrating trying to figure out what in the heck was going on.
Yeah, but that was, you know, that was probably an important finding, because a lot of people were having the same issue. And they didn't have the resource. You know, this is municipal plants I'm talking about. They didn't have the resources to do the investigations that you guys had. So that was probably, although it may have been depressing at the time, it actually probably was a pretty important discovery. Did you have any problems with silica at Yuma?
No.
There were
It's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, it is surprising. I figured that would be something that,
You got a little-
Treatment worked pretty good.
You got a little silica removal from the pretreatment system
the lime softening.
down
Yeah.
there, and it's,
Right.
my recollection, it was kind of just enough
Yeah.
to keep below the precipitation threshold, as long as the recoveries didn't get over about 72 or 74% or something like that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think if it had tried to run higher recovery, they'd had to do something a lot more about silica.
But now, over the period of time that the Yuma plant was actually being developed, CA membranes had sort of become obsolete.
That's right.
Did you ever consider switching? Or would that have opened a whole can of worms you didn't want to get involved with?
It's a lot of money. I don't know. We tried to run the polyamides membranes there, and we had severe plugging problems with those membranes because of, well, I don't know. I think because of the rough surface. Right. And it would just trap the particles, so you'd see the flux rates. Right. So the flux would drop off, and
Well, I had that same problem. I know when I talked to Dick Sudak, who was in the first interview. When they first tried it at Orange County Water District with the TFC, they had the same problem. I mean, the CA membranes performed well,
yeah.
and TFC had the promise of performing well at much lower pressure, but he said they just couldn't deal with that fouling problem for the same reasons.
Couldn't disinfect the water.
That's right. That's right.
without destroying the membrane, as I recall. So, and then the membrane couldn't stand the fouling and deposition if
That's right.
if it wasn't disinfected. So it was kind of a two-stage gotcha.
Yeah.
But I know we had discussions when we were in the process of contracting for the membranes, the initial suit of membranes for the salting plant. And we didn't really feel real good about anything other than the CAs that we'd been using. And also, the Bureau of Reclamation is kind of like one of these great big ore carriers. It don't turn very fast. But we did have some discussion that come replacement time, we thought we might feel a lot more comfortable with the polyamides. Of course, then we never got to run the damn plant, so it got to be a little bit academic. But there was some internal discussion about that, and especially about what our replacement membrane might be.
Well, the plant sits there today, unused, and I understand the original membranes are still in cold storage.
Well, 1/3 of them.
1/3 of them.
The 2/3 have gone, the hydronautics have gone, and 1/3 of the fluid
The fluid
systems
systems
are
are gone.
But you're right, the other third are in cold storage in San Diego.
What do you think, if there's ever an opportunity to use them, how do you think they'll perform after all these years?
Well, they still use them.
They do?
Yeah, because the facility is run by water produced by desalting, and so periodically we change out the membranes, or
Probably
the
do.
membranes are changed out, and still use the
Original CA.
original CAs.
That's a testament to perseverance, if nothing else.
Exactly.
They must be the only CAs still in captivity anyway. I don't know of another plant anywhere that still has CA membrane. It's interesting. So when you, Ed, when you were at Guantanamo for quite a few years, were they starting to think about seawater RO at that point, or were the thermals still performing okay?
The thermals were being replaced, and I don't think ROs went in there until, I want to say the late 80s, 87, 88, something like that. They started putting them in and ran them along with the thermal plants.
Yeah. One of the things, when I was working for Hydronautics, I used to go there fairly frequently. And our manager there, Jim Finley, taught me an expression. It's IBM. Inshallah Bukra Memkin.
Yes.
Tomorrow,
Maybe.
Ken, you sort of left the business when you left the Bureau and went into construction and engineering of primarily conventional water and wastewater plants.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of where the opportunity showed up for me, and it was aside from the specific membrane technology, the water quality issues were still out there.
Right.
So, I mean, you kind of still had, especially as all that, with the wastewater plants, with all the reuse associated with the effluents.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of water quality stuff you got to know something about. But I'll tell you something, Ian. The best part of my career ever in the whole water business was when I went down to Roswell. That was a really great experience. God, we were running every different kind of membrane there was down there, and little ones and big ones and tubular ones and hollow fibers and spiral wraps. And there was nothing going on much in the in the membrane business, we didn't get our fingers in a little bit, at least to know what was going on. And it was just really, really great fun. Then we had some electrodialysis stuff still. And one year we ran the distillation plant. So,
That was the only thermal unit you had down there, was vapor compression?
yeah, that was the original demonstration plant that OSW built. They built that vapor compression one in Roswell, and they built the electrodialysis one in Webster, and then they built the tubular ones in Freeport, San Diego, and Rushville Beach.
Yeah.
Freezing one in Rushville Beach.
I just noticed in the GWI Emerging Technologies, I forget what they call it, but every year at their annual get-together somewhere, I think it's in France this year, they give inventors 10 minutes to present their concept, and then the audience gets to vote. And one of the contestants this year is freezing. And I thought, how many times have we seen that reemerge?
Yes.
It does.
Well, I think it's a matter of those people that know it's not worth pursuing, you know, along out of the business, and some other guys come in, you know, and think, oh, you know, the calories involved, you know, are a lot less than distillation, you know, and so they think about the theory and it, you know, not the practical aspects of it, you know.
Yeah, I met a guy several years ago at a symposium in, what was it, University of Southern Illinois, that was organized by Senator Paul Simon, who by that time had retired, but that's where he had hung his hat. And this guy was a refrigerator repairman, and he thought he'd solved the problem of freezing. And he wouldn't tell me anything about it because he'd applied for 16 patents.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's more than one problem with freezing.
That's right. Is there anybody, when you started out in the business, Ed, was there anybody that you can recall was particularly a mentor for you?
Everybody was a mentor.
Well, when we first went over there on the distillation side of the house, Tomlinson and Cedar were still the
Rev Cedar, yeah.
yeah, they were still the guys there, and you know, those are the guys responsible for some of the basic computational bases for distillation stuff.
Yeah.
I wasn't on that side of the house, but you had to be impressed with an
Yeah.
organization that had that much mental horsepower associated with it.
Forgot about that.
Kurt, how about you? Any one individual that steered you towards membranes, or did you just
Well,
go there naturally?
The fellows I work with at W.L. Batcher Associates, Lohman, Professor Batcher, and the guy that took over from him, Ferris Standerfoot. You know, he's really the man that mentored me quite a bit. You know.
Right. Did you do any membrane work at all at Boyle?
Well, mostly actually studies, you know, like Cambria, Santa Barbara, other things, and with the Orange County Water District, you know, early study work, you know, about what to do about the idea that they're doing now, you know, with taking wastewater and turning it back into drinking water indirectly so far, you know, but, you
Now,
know.
were you there at the same time as Dave Furukawa?
Yeah, well, I worked with Dave Furukawa really, I think, 3 times in my life.
At
you
the
know,
Bureau.
At the Bureau of Reclamation.
Mm-hmm.
When I first went there, and he worked on electrodialysis. He had the early ED pilot plants going up there in Denver. And then later, with Boyle Engineering, he was working with Boyle Engineering for a while too.
Right.
In the that was mid-70s, something like that. Then later, when he ran the San Diego marketing office for Filmtech, you know, I went to work for him there.
Mhm. Yeah, well, you guys were at Boyle sometime before I went to Boyle. But one of the projects I worked on at Boyle was the second Cambria study. And subsequently, they had a third Cambria study, which I think Corallo did, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
And now they're looking at it again, I understand.
right. Yeah,
One of these days, it's kind of like the history of desalting in California. You know, sooner or later it's going to happen, but it's probably going to be later.
Yes, unfortunately, it will be much later than it should be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they've been talking about it there for, when we interviewed Leon Arbach. I mean, he was at Bechtel, and they did a study back in the early '60s on Balsa Island. Remember the Balsa
yeah.
Island project?
Right.
It's 1,000 megawatts and 100 million gallons a day or something.
Yeah, should have built it then.
Should have built it then. They never built it today.
Well, if they'd have built it then, they'd have had to tear it down and replace it with seawater membranes anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Remember when EPA decided that they were going to pass the Safe Drinking Water Act? How much do you think that kind of legislation had to do with the growth of membranes?
I don't think it had all that much effect on it. You know, I think it would have gone that way anyway,
Yes, I agree.
even without that.
Even without that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was too good a technology to take care of all these issues.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I
right.
can remember in the early days when I was in Sanibel, AWWA had a desalting committee which consisted of 3 people. Myself, C.E. Pitts Jr., whose father owned a subdivision down there, and C.E. ran they had an ionics, an old ionics unit down there, and an RO. And Neil Klein, the Orange County Water District. And we had trouble getting even just one paper on the program at AWWA because they referred to it as space age technology. Now this was in the late 70s. And, you know, membranes had been around for a while then, and particularly in Florida. You know, there was a significant number of plants in Florida. And but when you start talking about removing specific contaminants which won't come out with conventional water treatment, I've always thought that the Safe Drinking Water Act probably had more impact than a lot of people think.
Well, you could, I guess. I'm kind of still in Kurt's corner. I think that was going to happen anyway.
I think you're right.
because
I think you're
I
right.
mean, it might have pushed it along a little
Yeah.
faster, you know, but I
Yeah.
think it would have happened anyway. You
Yeah.
know.
I mean, you know, the technology just does that. It
Yeah.
kind of builds on itself, and if you're not careful,
It gets away from you.
it can. I mean,
Yeah.
gee, you can decide you're going to treat for Lord knows what,
Yeah.
rhodium, or mainly because you can. It's kind of the same thing with the analytical side of the house. I mean, water quality standards got tougher and tougher because it was easier and easier and easier to analyze for all those itsy bitsy things that we never thought about before.
Right.
So once the technology gets driving it, well, a lot of things happen.
Yeah, I think
Seems like.
that, you know, EPA has always, I think, followed the philosophy, if you set the standard low enough, somebody would develop the testing methodology to find it.
That may be some of their mentality. I have a little hard put to give them that much credit personally. But
Yeah, I second that.
How did you like working on the sales side of the business with Filmtech?
Well, that was enjoyable.
And you were there for how long?
About 4 years, four and a half.
Years? 4.5 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And you were involved in the big sale And Dave Furukawa's famous story he tells about selling the plant in the Canary Islands, or
Yeah.
selling the membranes to the Canary
Right.
Islands.
And then I ended up starting it up over there.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was a nice assignment.
I'll
It was
bet.
an enjoyable assignment.
It's a funny thing, a lot of the plants that we work on are in nice places. Guantanamo, maybe not quite so nice. but
Well, it was pretty
I
nice.
guess it was all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kurt,
Yeah.
who else, apart from Dave? And
Well,
we've already interviewed some of the Film Tech people that are still around.
Yeah.
Who else did you work with at Film Tech?
Well, there's Bob Riley, you know, and he has his own consulting firm.
Right.
Still running it now, you know, but he was also working in the San Diego office with Dave Furukawa. Did you interview Bob Riley, by the way?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, you have? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Scott Freeman, you know, and obviously Gene Erickson and Roy Larson in the Minneapolis office, and also, you know, John Cadot. I met him, and we had quite
Now,
a
was
good
this
relationship.
this was before Dow purchased Film Tech?
I went to work for Film Tech just about the time when Film Tech was purchased by Dow. I think I actually was an employee at Dow Chemical Company then by that time already, you know,
Ah,
the Film Tech division.
Right.
Yeah, it was just after they acquired Film Tech that I went to work for them. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about Wrightsville Beach. It was, as I understand it, it was a facility that was built to allow equipment manufacturers to come in, put their equipment there and test it.
That's correct.
Did you also have, did OSW also have some of its own equipment there you were testing?
Oh, it was funded by OSW, of course, a lot of it. I don't think we had, you know, OSW would contract with a company to develop a certain type of equipment and then bring it there and test it. But as far as government-owned equipment or built equipment, they didn't have any of that.
Right. That's very similar to the concept of the one that's now in Alamogordo,
Yeah.
where they have, you know, essentially the Bureau built a place where you could, you know, if you build it, they will come concept, I
That's
guess.
correct, yeah.
Yeah. That's actually an interesting way of
It
doing
was,
it.
it was a good facility because it gave you all the utilities and support there, laboratories and all that kind of stuff, shops.
I know Wrightsville Beach started very early on the Inco test facility on
Yeah.
the sound over there, and
International
that's where I
rental.
worked first, you know, on vertical tube evaporator with Bachelor Associates. I was down there, and initially as a student, I got the raw data readings, you know, down there. They send them in once a week, and I calculated heat transfer coefficients and made the graphs, you know, and helped write the monthly reports to OSW on how the equipment operated. And when I got my bachelor's degree, they sent me down there, and I was down there for a year and a half, working on that. Then I went for my master's, and after that I went to work for the Bureau of Reclamation in Denver, and then I went to Stern Sarcher with Dave Case, and they had, Stern Sarcher had a contract with OSW to operate a 5-effect vertical evaporator distillation plant down there that was designed and built by Oak Ridge National Laboratory. That was in the days, you know, when they're going to think about nuclear power and, you know, to power dissolving, to make the desert bloom with nuclear power and distillation processes. And I ran that plant for a couple of years. You know, that was a real nice test facility. So it was not only private contractors that went into Wrightsville Beach, it's always other government agencies that actually had equipment there, like ORNL, Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
What do you think was your greatest accomplishment during your career?
Well, I survived.
Yeah, I second that motion.
Relatively unscathed. But a project or maybe a series of projects that stand out as perhaps your favorites or which demonstrated exactly what you wanted them to demonstrate? Or
Well, I think the research that we did down in Yuma, or still doing down in Yuma, some small plants are there, and manufacturers are building it, bringing in their equipment now, or have been for the last 10 years, and testing it out down there too. So I think as far as advancing the state of the art, that was probably the most interesting.
Good, good. Ken, how about you?
If we ever could have started the Yuma plant, that would have been it. I mean, that would have been the top of the list. But
Yeah, that's right.
we kind of got politicked out of that one, regrettably. And you know, aside from that, I think the development work we did down in, as I said, down at the Brackish Water Test Center in Roswell.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that's where the 8-inch spiral wounds came from. It's where the 12 inches came from. It's where the big bundles work was done. And that to me was exciting. Every day was a fun day to go to work.
Good.
And you know, we had Dow people down there, Monsanto people down there. Always had at least 4 or 5 different tech reps, manufacturer reps down there. So there was a lot of smarts if you knew enough to ask the right questions. But I think we did a lot of good work down there. And I think, and that remark about Jim Watt, who was the guiding hand behind shutting down the Office of Saline Water, I was very serious about that, because I think the loss of those test facilities and the availability of those facilities to the technical marketplace, you know, like Ed said, Rice Beach, the manufacturer could bring their stuff down there and all the support they needed. It's somebody to run the thing, power, water, operators, data takers, all kind of stuff. And those facilities, to me, really drove the technology, both especially membrane technology,
Yeah.
but also the distillation technology.
Well, coming back to your earlier question about what was the most disappointing experience, that is when OSW got shut down.
Yeah.
I think that was a big political mistake for American industry. I think we would still have the lead in the world now if that wouldn't have happened. We turned it over to the Japanese and the Koreans, you know, and now the Chinese.
And
you
now
know,
the Chinese, yeah.
The whole desalting industry, they're taking over. We would have a lot more business in that field if they would have stayed with it.
Yeah.
We had the lead at the time, and we could have kept the lead.
But as I recall, the rationale was that it was now commercial technology, and therefore the government should no longer support it.
Yeah, but that was not correct, because it developed further afterwards,
Yeah.
quite a bit.
That's
you
right.
know,
That's right.
we were still in the second or third inning, especially for the membrane technology
put,
at
yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway.
Well, you've seen both sides of that. I mean, you saw the kind of stuff that came out of OSW, and
Oh, yeah.
you've been a lot closer than we have in recent years
Oh, yeah.
to see what's going. I just think we'd been a lot farther along than we are, but
Yeah, I always thought it was a mistake.
Yeah, that was a big mistake.
It's, you know, the technology was commercial, meaning that you could sell systems with a fair degree of optimism that they would actually work. But it wasn't fully developed.
That's right.
And as Kurt said, that was our technology and we lost it.
Mhm.
Kurt, what is when you look back on your career, what was what do you recall as perhaps your most satisfying achievement?
But the most enjoyable assignments I had was Wrightsville Beach, both assignments, first with W.L. Batcher and then later with Stearns Archer. And the work with Film Tech, and especially in Las Palmas, that was a very enjoyable assignment. I mean, so it's like enjoyable or satisfying, it's sort of the same thing there, And again, I'm the YDP, when I was working down there, that was a very good assignment, and it was very disappointing that nothing happened down there, that it got shut down. I mean,
Yeah, I think those of us who are involved in the industry, we're all kind of disappointed it got shut down.
Right.
Because it would have been the largest membrane plant in the world by a factor of 10, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of questions that we all had about it just the design was different from what we've been doing elsewhere. That was unfortunate.
Yes, it was.
Ed, if you're sitting in your dorm room in North Dakota, and if you had to do it over again, would you do it?
Yep.
It's been that much fun, huh?
Oh, yeah. The first plant that I actually had a chance to dig my hands in was in Antarctica, McMurdo.
Is that right?
It was tied to the nuclear plant there.
That was when you were with the Navy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't know much about flash evaporators then, but
You
I
did
gradually learned. Yeah, it was a good career.
Good. Ken, how about you?
Oh yeah, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Absolutely. It was brand new stuff. It was breaking technology. Things were happening every day. Every day, new stuff was happening. It was just great fun. Great fun to go to work every day.
Well, that's it. Whatever career that you're in, that's important.
It is. Oh
You
yeah.
have to enjoy going to work. Kurt, how about you?
Yeah, I figure, it was my hobby, go to work and do something, just like a hobby. I mean, I'm really thankful that I ran into Lohman Batcher, and he hired me to calculate heat transfer coefficients for the test plan he had running in Wrightsville Beach under OSW contract. And it went from there, I stayed with it. It was very interesting, and I had a very good career. And,
Good.
and just like Ken said, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. No regrets.
Just to wrap up, is there something you'd like to, would you like to make a closing statement, Kurt? Something we haven't covered you think is important for the audience to know?
Well, in general, keep up the good work. Hopefully try to get our lead back, in the technology. Hopefully, eventually get the humor desalting plant running somehow, for something. And maybe the drought in California will get them thinking about doing something with it.
Yeah, it would be nice because it did work.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, ran
You know.
multiple times.
How about you, Ken?
I think what's important now is the kind of thing that you guys are doing. The fact that our technology is kind of not so much a stepchild anymore, and we've got a lot more people interested in it, and one of these days the environmentalists are going to come around to the fact that it's good It's good stuff. It's good technology. It's good for people. So, and, you know, that's kind of my
It's
my
amazing how many people still think that it's brand new technology, and they're surprised to hear that it's being used somewhere.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
The education of the populace is.
Yeah, some
help it
people
along.
still think it's exotic technology.
Well, it kind of is, you know. It's kind of magic. How do you push that water through that piece of plastic? You know?
Ed, you have a closing remark?
I do not think I have any more to say.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. It's been interesting,
Thanks for having us.
and wish you all the best. And that concludes this interview.